Learn that we're hosting. Pamela and I will be talking about the Great Resignation, as it's called in the US, or the high attrition rates we've been seeing in these recent months and what is driving them. So I have with me Pamela Rath. She is the founder of New Work Today, a new work enthusiast, and an expert on the entire topic. Welcome, Pamela.
Hello, Ronke. Thank you for having me.
It's such an honor that you gave me your time to discuss this. When I read this study, you were the first person I thought of talking to because I was so intrigued by the results. And but since our viewers don't know you, maybe you would like to talk a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. As you said already, I am the founder of New Work Today, which is a consulting company. I recently got self-employed last year, and I try to help my clients on topics regarding motivation, recruitment, and everything that goes from the customer journey to the employee journey and the way back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a new work enthusiast, which means I came across the new work theory like about 3 years ago when I studied organizational psychology. And that really, I really got intrigued with the topic because it resonated with me. And as the founder of that theory, Friedrich Bergmann also is from Austrian descent, or was from Austrian descent. He passed away recently. This is something that I want to keep up. I want to keep up with his legacy, really.
Yeah. So it's so interesting that this new work theory is based around an Austrian researcher. I think most people don't even know that. It's become such a global topic, and there's so many aspects of that. And I think the aspects of new work are something that you are also very passionate about, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
this is something that's very close to your heart. And I think new work is also a part of what would make employees stay with companies, right? This whole aspect of creating a new workplace that makes it more interesting or more I would like to say livable maybe for employees to be in the workplace is something you're working towards, right?
Exactly. That's exactly one of my goals and the purpose why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Because new work intends to keep, intends to enable people to grow
Mm-hmm.
in order to make a company grow.
Yeah.
So new work really emphasizes on the symbiosis of
Mm-hmm.
people and organizations,
Mm-hmm.
and that one is not without the other, and that labor and work is so important for the human being in order to grow and develop
Mm-hmm.
as a human. It should not be a burden.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to labor or work being a burden, then we're talking about all those topics toxicity is about.
Mm-hmm.
And new work wants to enable managers, leaders, and organizations to create that environment where people can work as a human being, to be as a human being, to develop their skills, their competences, to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yes.
this is our purpose in life. What are we here for? We are here to develop ourselves. That's the only purpose there is. And if we need to give our lifetime hours to an organization, we want to get something in exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much about compensation. Of course, we need to get salary or other sorts of
Benefits. Mm-hmm.
reward
Mm-hmm.
or benefits. It could be accommodation, it could be food, it could be anything to keep us alive, like physically, but mentally and emotionally, those 8 hours a day need to be as rewarding as they would be if we didn't work for somebody else. If we work on our own, as for instance, as a farmer, when we produce our own food, or we would be, I don't know, anything else that crafts something, man needs to produce something, needs to create results.
Yeah. So this is such a good point and a very important topic. And I find it interesting because obviously you have been thinking about this for years now. But what we've been seeing due to the pandemic is a shift in perception of work. So the last 2 years have shown that there is a possibility to have a completely new workplace. Before 2020, before the whole pandemic hit, as bad as the whole situation is, no one would have envisioned this world where there was flexibility, remote working, and just a completely different approach. Now there have been downside to this working environment, but what has also happened is that not just employers had to adapt, but also employees started to think about exactly these topics that you are talking about, I think. And we have been seeing that a lot of people have been asking questions on how they want to continue to work, how they want to change maybe what they do, if they want to work for themselves to produce something, like you said, have the power to shape their world themselves. So for me, it was very interesting to see that somebody actually bothered to make a big study around this topic of high attrition rates, because that's what's happening. I'm one of those people who actually resigned from their job, and I'm currently unemployed. I've decided to take a time out for a couple of months to decide how I will move forward. And I did leave a very well-paid, well-compensated job just to think about what I want to do. So seeing the study where these three researchers, Donald Sull, Charles Sull, who's his son, and Ben Zweig, looked at millions of reviews, of company reviews, and tried to find out what makes people leave their workplace, was really interesting. So one of the things they found is that attrition rates are really, really high at the moment. So I have some comparison of different industries with their attrition rate. And what's also interesting, attrition rates are high, but they're not the same for all industries. We would assume that, for example, like in retail, where people couldn't work from home, where they had a lot of pressure, people would all be leaving at the same rate. But that's not the case. So what they found was that there are different attrition rates for the same industry for different companies. For example, if you look at Boeing or Southwest, who traditionally have a very healthy work environment, they have very low attrition rates, while companies like, for example, Netflix or SpaceX, which is a Tesla company, have very high attrition rates. So that was surprising. And I think that is something that made them dig a little deeper into this. So this is an American study, obviously, and the data is mostly around, 600 companies in the US, big companies. But what is your view on what's happening in Europe or in Austria? What are you seeing around this topic?
I guess we have similar dynamics here. I don't know if we could really use the terminology of Great Resignation, because we have a different background here in terms of legal environment and stuff, and also different types of working models. But of course, we had a shift of thinking. The mindset of employees was changing in terms of thinking, how can I contribute to my company, and what am I still willing to do for my company? So people started to really calculate and compare, like the payoffs that I said, I give something and what do I get for that? And I guess that the pandemic was one moment when people, for the first time since, I don't know, maybe 50 years or something, people were thinking, well, life could be really short.
Yeah.
And what do I want to do with my life? And there is just this one. And how do I want to spend my working hours? And that made, I think, that phenomenon created people reflecting their careers. So before the pandemic, we already had Gen Y and Gen Z turning into these directions. They already told us or showed us the signs that they were not willing to give the same things that our generation did for the same cost. They already articulated that they were not willing to risk their own health.
That's an interesting topic. Do you feel that the pandemic has led to our generation and older people to shift towards this mindset that Gen X and Gen Y already had? Not Gen X, sorry, Gen Y and Gen Z?
I guess so. That's at least what I perceive. Most of all, because obviously I'm interested in those things, and I get into discussions about those topics. And I realized that all the things that I have been reading or observing before, people are now articulating for themselves. They articulate, I'm not willing to pay the price anymore. Yeah. And the price is to give my life, to give my working hours for somebody or something like an organization that is not caring enough for me. So I'm not willing to.
Okay, you said twice now, giving, willing to give. And I think that's a big aspect. What are we willing to give to our employers? But the other aspect is, what do we expect in return, right? What are the variants that have to be in place that we are willing to give our workforce, our energy, our life to these companies?
I guess something that was very interesting about this research, and you gave to me the hint about Brené Brown's podcast already discussing that matter. And something that was most interesting about it is that now I lost the thread. What was the question?
The question was what our expectations are towards our employers. Exactly. Because one is the giving, but the other is, what do I get?
What they said and how they designed the research was also giving into account what companies are communicating about themselves, about their own culture.
Yeah.
So what are people expecting is that what they read in the employer branding sachets, that's basically what they're expecting. It's the same as you go shopping and you see a commercial about, I don't know, the drink, the new drink on the shelf, and they say it's flavored naturally with strawberries. Then you expect a natural flavor of strawberries, right?
Yeah.
So people
very true.
People expect that the core values of a company that they themselves communicate, they want to experience those. And when
that's a good point.
They don't experience that, the disappointment is what thrives the attrition.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, corporate culture and what companies communicate about that corporate culture, respect, ethical behavior, inclusiveness, is something that people have become to expect. And especially the younger generation expects you to hold up to those values. And I'm seeing an interesting comment here. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, unfortunately, but he's saying that a high attrition rate is common in Europe and in US, but in the African continent, the conversation is not the same. And I tend to agree. I think we are in this luxury position that we can actually choose how we want to be treated. And that's not necessarily the same in everywhere in the world. So unfortunately, for the African continent and maybe even for a lot of places in Asia, South America, this discussion is not the same. But I think that ties very much into, this pyramid of values. As soon as your basic needs are covered, you start to thinking about other things, like, how do I want to live my life? Go into this whole philosophical discussion about what you expect from life. And I'm glad that we are in this position that we can. And I do hope that other places will soon, also reach the point where people don't just simply have to take every job. So
I guess, can I contribute to that comment? I think what's different in Europe, for instance, is that we were living in such high standards here on a living level, that with the pandemic we were taught to reflect what is really necessary. And that, of course, a completely luxury type of discussion. But it was so important to find out, do I really need to consume that much? Do I really need to have that much money? Is that really making me feel better? Or does it basically help me avoid the virus? No, it doesn't. After all, I'm only human. And so the concentration and the focus went to really this humanity. And people, they became a bit more humble and chose less working hours, for instance. They found out that maybe if I worked only for 30 hours and I had that and this amount less money, I would be equally happy. And that sort of discussion and mind shift maybe created that drive into either completely resignation or changing of career.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just that we are in this privileged position that we can actually think about that. And now, because we have the freedom to actually choose how we want to be treated. And this is a great place to be. And this brings me to the next thing I wanted to discuss, because obviously Donald Sull, Charles Sull, and Ben Zweig, they looked at like 40 million Glassdoor reviews to understand what is it that we are looking for in a working place? What is it that will make us go away? So, and obviously, when we talk about companies and offers, we tend to talk about compensation. So we always think it's compensation that will make people stay or leave or whatever, or go to another place. And although this is a factor, what they found was actually quite interesting. So they took compensation as a baseline. They took those 40.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it is. So basically, they took that as a baseline and then looked at those 40 million Glassdoor reviews, went through them with artificial intelligence. They actually created a program to analyze that. And then they found the top 5 indicators of why people would leave a workplace. And that was quite interesting. So toxic corporate culture is the top reason why people leave a place. It's 10 times higher predictor than compensation. So if you look at the language used in these reviews and how they rate the companies, and you look at the different things, then you will see that toxic corporate culture is the main driver. And there is some other data in those studies as well that say that about 20% of people who left because of toxic work culture. And then there's obviously some other indicators which are much more important than compensation. Compensation is actually on the 16th place in the list of things that employees expect. So job insecurity and reorganization is also very interesting. So because a lot of people tend to leave when, companies like fusion, when there's a fusion with other companies, when there's job insecurity, what happened a lot during the pandemic because, the common economic situation of companies wasn't that high. But there's one that's very interesting, high levels of innovation. What do you think about that? Because that's such an interesting indicator.
That was a very interesting finding. And I didn't really expect that in that amount. But of course, when you think about it, it's only logical. Because when you are in an environment which creates a lot of innovation, it most probably also impacts that you have great pressure. and there's a lot of money involved, and that you are really on a tough timeline because there's a lot of competition going on, and maybe you are in a startup environment where you have maybe like a short number of people, like in a short company, people like 10 people have to do the same thing or the same amount of work as in a corporate that's already 10 years in the market, maybe 50 people would do. And you have a lot of role conflict going on. When you have people like what we say in German, when you're wearing like 3 different hats, and you have like 3 roles in one body, you that creates a lot of tension. And when management doesn't really respond to that, that might create toxic environment, because once expectations and the expectations that you have and the real life demand doesn't go together, people really get stress. And stress in any in any dimension is a cause of sickness or illness, be it physically or mentally.
Such a good point. I mean, I think high levels of innovation, and we tend to not see that, go hand in hand with a lot of stress. These startup environments and these high innovation companies have high expectations on their employees. And when you go back to those attrition rates I showed, it was obvious, like SpaceX and Netflix. Those are well known for their high innovation environment. And they had a lot of attrition, much higher than comparable companies in that field. And for me, one of the indicators, failure to recognize employee performance, that resonated very deeply with me, because I have a big issue working with, colleagues where I know they don't actually, carry their weight, and nobody really cares. And that's something they talked about. And I think that's such an interesting thing to see, that people get frustrated and disillusioned when they see that it doesn't matter how well you perform. That you can just, like coast along. And you would think that this would be a good situation to be in, but it's not. It's actually something that will make you go elsewhere where people appreciate your effort, right?
It's a good situation for the rest, for the people who stay.
Yeah. It's a good situation for the people who stay, but it's not a good situation for the company, right? Because the people who will leave will be your actual high performers, and those who stay are the ones who don't care. So also an interesting point. And then, of course, for the pandemic, poor response to COVID-19, I would have thought that this would be higher on the list for the last 2 years, but it's still more relevant than compensation. So people were obviously not willing to risk their lives just for money, right?
But that's basically what the rest of the research says. People are not willing to risk their life and to risk their health. And COVID is just the most prominent illness or sickness there was. But that's what we're talking about. People are not, or for instance, let's put it that way. Jen said was the first to speak up and say, I'm not willing to get that heart attack. I'm not willing to pay the price with my health. Most of all because I don't get anything out of it. But there's also, that also comes with another phenomenon when we're talking about like startups or innovation. What we have when you compare the big corporates and then the small medium businesses or really startup companies, what went on the last 20 years was that hierarchies were being completely erased, and that on one hand you don't have any career paths anymore, and on the other hand you don't have any development to grow. So there was a trade-off before, that you got the compensation, which was okay, and then also you had a path to follow. You had a vision to follow for yourself. You could grow, you could become somebody, you could own more money, you could develop into a special field. And once that payment went away and only compensation was the only
Only reward, yeah.
the only reward, and the career was gone, then people were starting to thinking, okay, it's not in balance anymore. My giving is not in balance with what I get out of here. And if I don't get shares, and if I don't get the career, and then if I don't get skills or trainings, what do I do here?
Yeah. That's also such an important discussion. And I think we could have an entire session on the question of what is development and what is growth. And does it necessarily mean that you have to be promoted? And what are other options of growth? Because I feel that if we move in this new workplace, a lot of hierarchy levels will go away, right? And companies will have to think about what it means for their employees to have the possibility to grow. And there's something else I want to look at, because I took a closer look at the study, and I made a few slides on the cost of these high attrition rates. So the organizational cost that this toxic culture has on the companies, because I think that's also a very, very important discussion to have, to understand what it costs a company to have employees leaving. Because a toxic work culture makes it 10 times more likely that people will leave, 10 times more likely than compensation. And as I already said earlier, 20% of employees that have left the job in 2021 actually left because of the company culture. So I would like to talk with you a little bit more about what actually makes toxic culture in a minute. But let's take a quick look at the different indicators and costs. So one of the things I think companies tend to underestimate is that having a toxic culture and people knowing about that toxic culture, and that is something that happens today. You can't keep that under wraps, because you have Glassdoor and all these other platforms where people talk about their company, and they can do it anonymously, so they don't have to hold back. So this makes it harder to find new people. And with companies, I mean, I'm in the tech field, and I know that companies are struggling to find new employees. This can mean that you will have it even harder to find new people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then there's this other, there's some other numbers. So we talked about, the fact that people will leave because their contribution is not valued, because they feel they're not valued. And I think what happens first is that they become disengaged. And what you see is that if employees are disengaged, they stick around, but they don't actually work a lot. They're not very productive, and this costs a lot of money too. So there's a number. It's obviously a number from the US, but 18% productivity loss is quite a high number, right? I mean, that's a lot of money to spend for people just hanging around who don't actually engage in what they're supposed to be doing.
But that's basically the problem, because when we are talking about costs, we're only talking about money that is spent. And that is not money that is spent. These are implicit costs. So they are not seen, and they are not measured, and they do not come out at the annual reviews at the end of the year. And that's why managers probably don't have that focus on those figures.
I agree.
They don't get their bonuses on figures that they're not there.
Exactly. There's no metering of these costs.
No metering.
So they're just hidden
no accountability on those figures.
Yeah. And then there's the whole, you talked about health, you talked about physical health. No, you talked about mental health. The interesting thing is toxic work culture also has an impact on physical health. So there are numbers that show that, and these 35 to 55% actually talk about physical health. So in the US, this is a problem for the companies, because they pay the medical, and I'm not sure what it's called, medical for their employees. But for us in Europe, this is a societal cost. When people who suffer in a toxic environment have cardiac issues, and that's what actually happens. So talk a little bit about this health implication of stress. You already mentioned this a little bit.
Yes, but first of all, I want to respond directly on these figures here, and that's what you
Mhm.
already said. This is an economical factor that goes onto society here in Europe, or basically here in Austria. And I really don't understand why we don't hold companies accountable for those costs.
Mhm.
And when you think about blue collar workers, when you have an accident within the working environment, I don't know, when you are building a roof and you fall down and you break a leg, then your employer is accountable, or at least there will be explorations of what has happened and if he has met all the enduring methods to make sure that nobody falls down the roof, don't they?
Yes, that's
And
true. Mhm.
and here, within the white collar workers, within the knowledge workforce, as we call it,
Mhm.
I don't see any measurements and really explorations to really look out for the sources when people get sick physically or mentally within the workplace. Of
Yeah.
course, we have those examinations from AUVA or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But first of all, companies are not obliged to hold those examinations,
Mhm.
or they don't get a sanctioned when they don't hold those examinations. So this is a little bit something like, I can do it if I want to be like an A grade student. I'm an A grade company, but I don't need
Mhm.
to do it, and
Yeah.
I don't need to meet measurements for to avoid those sort of sicknesses. Like
Also,
when
I
you
think, Pamela, I think
they
that,
don't think this is a real threat,
yeah,
because when
exactly.
you face
Mhm.
a threat, like
Mhm.
I don't know, cybersecurity, you know that there can be any day there can be an attack. You will make those measurements and you will make your environment, your IT environment safe.
Yeah.
You're the expert in that.
Yeah, true. You will make an assessment and try to find out what you can do against it.
Exactly.
But I think what is also missing is an awareness of the fact that this is happening. I don't think that
Yeah.
many people are
Yeah.
really aware that this is causing
They don't see
physical
that as a
illnesses.
threat.
Yeah.
They
So they don't
still
see the
think that
correlation.
people
Mhm.
they still think that people are exchangeable
Yeah.
easily, which they are. But it costs. If you
Yeah.
exchange the workforce, these are implicit costs, and not only costs that we're talking about, like really hiring somebody else, paying fees to the recruitment agency, paying training for the new employee. These are explicit costs. You can count them.
Yeah.
But the implicit cost is that every time you bring somebody new in, you have to do the whole storming, forming, and all those things that teamwork needs to rebuild. And in this phase, you cannot be productive.
Yeah.
There we
I
go
agree.
again.
Yeah.
You have those implicit costs. And
Mhm.
also what you mentioned before, there's a terminology about when people are not productive. It is called shirking. And
Shirking. Okay.
company shirking, when
Mhm.
people are walking around the office, drinking coffee, chit and chat,
Yeah.
it's called
Yeah.
shirking.
Mhm.
Or, 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 or in inventing meetings, meeting tourism and stuff. This is
Mhm.
called
Okay.
shirking. And companies are more willing to pay that shirking
Mhm.
than to invest in a healthy environment. It
Mhm.
is it is like the same thing, when you're more likely to pay any sort of um, Strafe, punishment fee.
Punishment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know the word.
Yeah.
Then to change your behavior.
Yeah.
This is
But you
what we're
see,
having.
but Pamela, I think that these behaviors, they look like work. It's like what we had on
The-
this slide. It's the disengagement. You walk around, you talk to your coworkers. I always said that I was so more productive at home than I was in the office, because there were constantly people. You wanted to
so
have a
time
chat, you wanted to
consuming.
have a coffee, and in my opinion, we were never working when we were in the office. So I'm adamant that home office is important for productivity. But of course,
Absolutely.
that is my view on the matter. And so for some people, it might be different. But the health costs, I think they are so invisible that people, and I think even people who suffer from a disease due to the stress they have, they are not really making the connection between the toxic environment and what is happening in their life. And that makes it so difficult. I think we're not yet at the point where we realize that what is going on in the workplace has a major impact on well-being. And even though there are studies, there are people talking about, like Brené Brown, she talks a lot about well-being, and how
she talks about that for years.
Yeah.
And others are talking about that for years. Let me put that straight. This discussion that we're having, this research, is like Fridays for Future talking about the climate change.
Yeah, it's true.
It's the first time that we're having figures about a topic that we are living in a state of danger. There is something going on which affects us, our environment in the workforce. And we must talk about that, and we must change the way, because when we are losing the workforce, and what we're having already, I don't know the terminology in English, Fachkräftemangel, that we are facing here.
Yeah. Well, we're lacking experts for certain jobs.
We're lacking experts here, and we have demographic changes here. So if we don't change our ways of treating people, Gen Z and Gen Y, they will not be available for this game.
And I love that. I love how they
that too. But that's a danger for companies and their productivity. And it's a danger that they don't see and that they don't address. And one, I need to refer to one comment that Marcus here said before, or wrote before. If you accept a bad apple, you'll soon have a basket of rotten apples. This is the fact. Toxicity is contagious. And it has a reproduction factor that we don't even know yet, but that's something that neurologists talk about like years ago. When you are in an environment where you only receive negativity, you reproduce negativity. And it has a multiplier that is really bad.
Yeah. And the contagiousness of toxicity and bad behavior is so interesting. I read, I think it was in one of Simon Sinek's book, actually, where he talked about, I think it was Wells Fargo, and he talked about unethical behavior and how that propagates through a company, and how people who would normally be good people start to behave unethically if they see that. So yeah, it's very true.
That is how we do it here. They think if they step out, they will be the ones who get mobbed.
Yeah, that's true, because they feel that they have to perform in that environment. Exactly. And they will just copy what everyone else is doing because no one is paying attention. But let's also talk a little bit more about what other factors are part of a toxic culture, because they did this extra study. They looked at what people talked about when they talked about toxic culture. So they went back and took like 1.4 million records on Glassdoor and looked at the language that was used and what people actually said about the corporate culture and how that impacted the review. And I found that also very interesting, because they call it the toxic 5, and there are 5 things that are on top of the list. Let's have a quick look at those. And I think that's so reflective of what we all feel, right? Disrespectfulness. So I think one of the top things that can go wrong is that people are disrespectful, bosses that yell at you, that don't appreciate you, right? I mean, this is so obvious, but still it happens so much. What do you think about this?
What Brené Brown was saying in the beginning of the first podcast. You would have thought that avoiding those things is crucial for any organization, and still we have them everywhere. Yeah. But we have to be careful. We cannot always say that a whole organization is disrespectful. No. We have those, as they call it, pockets of toxicity, and they're probably most of the time not really identified because nobody talks about them. And that's also a finding they had when we're talking about industry comparison. I guess that in the more innovative companies, or in the where we have more knowledge working workforce, the awareness is higher. They talk about it more. They have a language for it. They know how to address and communicate about toxicity. Whereas in other blue collar fields, they don't even have the vocabulary, or they don't even think about it, because in those areas people go to work just to go to work and to earn money on an hourly basis. They live their lives elsewhere. Whereas in the knowledge working field, people live their true selves within the working environment. You really have to make that
distinction. Yeah, it's an interest, and I'm not sure I'm quite on board with that, because I agree that blue collar workers don't necessarily have the language for these things that are happening. But I also feel that in white collar jobs, even though people might have the language, it still happens because, as you said, there are pockets of toxicity. Like there is this bad manager and everyone knows that he's awful, but he's also a high performer. And that's what also happens, that even though people talk about this, it's well known that this guy is a problem or that woman is a problem, but they are kept because they are high performers. And this is valued more than their team's mental health, for example, or their physical.
Or as we have it here, they're not even high performers, but they are like the in-laws of the owner, or something.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the Austrian variant, somebody's friend or somebody's relative, and you just have to keep them. And even though everyone knows, this just goes on, and that is also, again, with one bad apple. It's one person, but it influences a whole, bubble of people who then might leave or be less productive. Yeah,
it really does. And I have to say, I've been there myself, and I was never immune. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we really have to address. We are only humans, and we are not immune. We are reproducing toxicity if we are not careful. And it is not something that people are doing on purpose or intentionally. It's just something that it's a role modeling issue. If there's something that you see every day, you're copying it. Yeah. And if you see that this is not sanctioned, you are copying it. There is something that's called in organization psychology, it's called corporate citizen behaviorship. Mm-hmm. It's like the same thing that you know how to behave as a citizen. You know that you must not cross the road with the red traffic light. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you still do it. Yeah. And if you're not sanctioned, next time you're also going to think about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that we just copy it, because what also happens is you take it into your private life. This whole toxic situation at work, it doesn't stay there. You take it home, and it propagates into your family and the well-being of your family. And
it's going to be reproduced there.
Yeah. And your kids might copy your behavior because they see, okay, it's okay to be disrespectful. It's okay to maybe be non-inclusive, which is the next topic. I mean, I find it interesting that disrespectfulness and non-inclusivity have about the same rating when it comes to how bad someone experiences the corporate culture and how toxic it is. So, and it doesn't actually matter what inequality it is or non-inclusivity.
Absolutely, because what it says to me is that it's not not depending on each other. On each other. Yeah. You can be included, you can be in the in crowd, and still people can be disrespectful to you.
And you will still feel unhappy, and you will still feel toxic. Yeah.
Can you imagine how bad that is?
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like the top 5 indicators, the toxic 5, as they call them, they are so obvious, but still it happens so often. I mean, a lot of this, like, for example, the cutthroat behavior, I feel that like some fields actually thrive on this behavior. They feel like this is a good thing, being very competitive, trying to outbest the other your teammates and stuff like that. It's presented as if it's a good thing.
And but that's what we learn. That's how we're socialized. Mm-hmm. We're socialized like that since the beginning. Competition has always been the main thing. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about organizations, it's only about like 10 years or maybe 15 years that organizations start to work with each other, to research with one another, to share. It has always been about compensation, about elbows. So this is like in the DNA of an organization. Of course, it gets reproduced.
And it's so interesting to see that it's actually not necessarily to be cutthroat or overly competitive to be successful, that cooperation is a better indicator of success as a whole,
Absolutely, it's quite the contrary. If you if you have researchers from Adam Grant,
Mhm.
give and take, for instance, in his research, it always pays off to
Mhm.
be the giver.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about toxic work culture and how it's the top indicator of why people are leaving. I mean, you would expect it, but it's good to have data on this. And I found also interesting that they took a look at what could make people stay or would be an indicator of having people stay, or what you could do as countermeasures. And they came up with a couple of things that you can do to make, people stay. I would like to discuss that a little bit as well and have your thoughts on that. One of the things, and I think we touched on this a little bit, was
Touched on
when
this,
we
yes,
talked about the changing of hierarchies and what it
exactly.
means to grow and to develop. And I think the top thing is lateral career opportunities here,
That's
right?
the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. If there's no space to grow, if there's no ladder to grow anymore, to go up, you have to step aside and look what's on the lateral career opportunities. And what we have to acknowledge is that people have the right to
Mm-hmm.
grow.
Yeah.
They have to want to develop, they want to be trained, and they want to develop and deepen their skills and competences.
Yeah.
And I don't let them do it, be it that way or that way, it doesn't matter. People need to grow.
Yeah.
And
They
once
need
you
to
have
grow and they want to grow. And
want to
if
grow,
you, yeah, it's just like, I mean, stagnation is something that makes you feel not just frustrated, but it actually makes you feel depressed, I think. The feeling that nothing is changing in your life is something that impacts your mental health. I think more than not having the next, I don't know, the next big,
it's so unnatural
yeah,
not to grow, because that's what we have been doing in our childhood. We
yeah,
grow, we change. Also, if we get older, our
mhm,
physique is changing, our mind is changing. Life is a constant change, and
mhm.
stagnation is the opposite of life.
Yeah, so true. So I find lateral career opportunities so important. Also, from another aspect, we always define, career growth as promotion. So at a certain point, you expect people to grow into, I don't know, management or whatever. But I think
Exactly.
what a lot of people don't understand is that you don't necessarily want that responsibility. Maybe you
No,
don't want to grow into management. You just want to do something new, because that's
exactly.
something that a lot of us have, this wish to experience new things and learn new stuff, as you said, grow. So that's why it's also important to give people the opportunity just to move laterally, just not just like in one direction. And yeah, remote
And what
work
we had
arrangement.
what about learning,
Yeah.
about learning, it was always when you had that company that of course did invest in trainings, but it
Mhm.
always had to have a relevancy in the company topics.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
nowadays we
Mhm.
have companies, younger companies, or startups that say, no, I don't care, you can have, I'm going to pay for your yoga lesson, and if you want to
Mhm.
learn Turkish, I'm going to pay for that, as long as you are learning, you are
Yeah.
developing yourselves, you are happy, you are getting new skills. I help you grow wherever it takes, because that's that kind of that's the payoff. The payoff nowadays is not the security and stability of the job. It's not
Mhm.
only compensational raise. The payoff today is employability.
Yeah.
I
And that's, yep.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. No. It's like the deal is, I keep you employed in the workforce, and if it's not for my company, I let you be able and competent for somebody else.
Yeah. And I agree that this is such an important topic at VMware. Even though I left, we had this programs what's called Take 3, and you could actually take training, whatever you want. And I, for example, the last thing I did was I did a Stanford online business course for diversity management. So, and it had nothing to do with my job whatsoever, but I'm just very interested in the topic, obviously, workplace and diversity and all these things. And they paid for that. And I think it's so important to have the possibility to explore other things and maybe think about doing something else with your life, even if it's not directly related with your role at the moment, right?
Another form of payment or payoff is like when Google started with it. Some companies are doing similar things. Google gave like 20% of the working hours for people to play in labs, like to find out innovation, to try themselves out, and either it was work relevant or it was something else, just to give the people space and time to try out something new. And if it was relevant for the company would have profited from it. And if it's not relevant for the company, well, at least they would have paid for shirking, but now they don't even have to pay for shirking. They pay for people being playful and innovative and curious and
creative,
entertained and engaged.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, so true. And it also ties into this whole concept of lifelong learning that we now need, to be successful.
That's the growing.
Yeah,
lifelong learning.
So there's 3 other things they found as good indicators what would make people stay. I mean, remote work arrangements, it's not necessarily a surprise. We all enjoy, being able to not be in the office, especially during the pandemic where we have to fear for our lives. And this is obviously something that was very important for a lot of us. Obviously, blue collar workers like frontline workers in retail could not have access to this option, but for them I think the predictable schedules were what was really important, and I think that is such an important aspect that we tend to underestimate. I mean, it's worse in the US because of their crappy workers laws, and a lot of things that they do can't be done here, but I still think that it's very important for people to know when they will have to work, because they have to, organize things around that, their schedule, childcare, and whatever that else is on the table.
Absolutely.
But what really surprised me was the third one. It was company-sponsored social events. Would you have expected this to be an indicator of?
I wouldn't have expected that, to be honest. Absolutely not. But it makes so much sense, because that's one thing that pays into belonging. When you have the opportunity to come as you are, into an environment which is not the office, and to talk about things that are not office related. You can come as your true self and enjoy the others as their true selves. And you can find out similarities, you can find out acquaintances, and that is some sort of, I don't know how you say it in English, the glue of culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I didn't think about that because, before the pandemic, we had so many company events, you didn't actually think it was something special. But yes, having this opportunity to see your coworkers not just as workers or employees, but talk to them about personal things, get to know them, build relationships, is a big point for company culture. And the easiest way to achieve that is to, enable some place where they can meet and chat. And it's probably also the cheapest thing to do, because coming back to the cost of the high attrition rates, and there was one number that replacing an employment can cost up to twice their annual
gross salary,
and that's quite a lot of money. Exactly. And there is a comment: social events. Let me just show that quickly. Social events are great for meeting people outside your team too. Such a good point, that you have the opportunity to become part of the larger company, not just of your, core team that you might see every day. So
absolutely.
This data was obviously from the US, and it's a big study. They looked at a lot of data, millions of reviews on Glassdoor, and they did a lot of analysis. But obviously, we still need more information and data from Europe, for example, because maybe the
I wonder
situation is slightly
when
different. Mhm.
when they start to do that in Europe, and I find it so much interesting. I mean, I'm not like the statistics person, but
Mhm.
I'm originally a philologist, and I
Mhm.
like semantics. So I found it so interesting that they
Mhm.
are just going through words and sentences and getting the essence out of it. And
Mhm.
what really fascinates me most is, what would you think about 1.4 million statements?
It's actually interesting. It's 40 million records they looked at for the entire thing. And then for the toxic workplace one, it was 1.4 million reviews just to see what words were used and,
And,
analyze
and
what impact those had.
And I wonder, from those 1.4 million statements,
Mhm.
how many of them were really told to the managers? So you
Yes.
must imagine that those
Mhm.
um, findings and those results and those written emotions and results of somebody quitting their job
Mhm.
never went up to the management. They don't know about this.
But this is part of the company culture of how open it is and how much of your authentic self you can bring to work, because people don't say anything because it's not safe, especially in toxic
Exactly.
environments. You can't go and
Exactly.
tell your manager, I don't like the way you're behaving. I don't like that you don't penalize people who don't do anything. And I don't like doing the work of other people. And
Mhm.
why is this place like it is? You can't do that, because then
Mhm.
you will be the one suffering from repressal or whatever, So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a good point. A lot of this stuff has definitely not been said within the company. And what I also found is the way they talked about the words that were used. They said there was contempt. So obviously, what also happens is, even if the employees are still in the company, they have very negative emotions. They have contempt for their managers, for their
Mhm.
co-workers. This is
Mhm.
such a bad place to be. I see that Michael Weber posted a comment about some further reading. There's obviously an article on Forbes.com, and I would recommend going and having a look at that as well.
Mhm.
I think this topic is such a big topic and it's so interesting, and I would really,
We're only
really,
at the
really
beginning.
know. Yeah, we're at the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to more information and more research on the whole thing. But I think that this study by Sull and Zweig was such a big step forward to actually tackling this program, and also showing a way of how it can be done, because now there's technology out there. There's the artificial intelligence they created
Mhm.
to go through those reviews, and I think this is a good place to start talking more about this, starting to look at more data. And I hope to talk to you about this topic again soon.
I would love to. And we have one thing I wanted to add is that we have to understand, and you as a chemist, you would understand best that, like, from the neurological perspective,
Mhm.
toxicity is really that something happens within the body,
Yeah.
and that creates those diseases, be it
It's
physically or mentally.
actually interesting because it also shapes brain chemistry and also
Exactly.
the plasticity of the brain. It's interesting to see how stress changes the brain.
And
And I
and, and
think
that
we
that's
underestimate this. Hmm?
exactly. And that's really an issue. That's a really sociological issue.
Yeah.
And I think we must not only address organizations, we also must address politics about
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
topics. What do we do with our people within the workforce? That's why I said it's these topics have to be discussed the same way as the climate change
Yes.
does.
I agree. I agree. So we are nearly at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone who joined this LinkedIn Live. And there's a comment from Marcus here saying that he will have to dig for the study. If anyone needs help finding the link, please hit us up, either Pamela or myself. We will direct you to the links of the MIT Sloan paper. And Pamela, I want to thank you so much that you took the time to talk with me on this topic. It was amazing. And we
Thank you
will
for inviting
definitely
me.
continue this.
Yes, would love to.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great afternoon, rest of the day, wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.